Hi, welcome to the June meeting of the Kubernetes VMware User Group, where we talk about running Kubernetes in all forms on VMware infrastructure. My co-chair, Miles Gray, said that he's tied up in a meeting and he might be joining us late. And we've got a couple of user members, but I don't see them present today either. But we're going to go along with the meeting without them. As always, members are invited to add items to the agenda. We don't have a whole lot there today, but you're welcome to even add it now or verbally bring it up. We'll break as we get through the things listed there. We can verbally discuss what you might want to chat about. Let me share the screen with the agenda notes document now, just to guide us along. Okay, can you see the agenda notes document open, I assume?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first item is events happening for the online KubeCon Europe. These were originally planned, of course, to be the physical event, but the CNCF is converting this to an online event in August. We've got a couple very specific sessions. You know, obviously anything related to Kubernetes might appeal to people on this call, but we have a user group session scheduled with Miles Gray and myself. The link to it is in this agenda notes doc. Let me open it here. So the subject will be best practices for running on VMware with Miles and myself. And since this is off in August, these things are always fluid. So I expect that we'll have the very latest material, or we are going to pre-record this. So maybe it won't be literally done at the last minute, but it will be a refresh as things go along. So you're likely to learn one or two new things there. The other session, I see David Von Thenen is on the call, and he's a co-presenter with Fabio on the vSphere cloud provider. And it says all things vSphere. Do you want to add any color on that, David? Or maybe you're procrastinating like me and haven't put that deck together yet.
Yeah, I haven't put the deck together yet, although, you know, I do have like what I'm going to do in mind. But yeah, basically it's covered there, and it's basically going to have deployment strategies for like multi-tenancy and stuff like that. So
maybe I'm putting too big a spotlight on David here, but I know for my own session, if somebody wants some specific item covered in that presentation that I'm doing, you're welcome to ping me on Slack and let me know. I can't, if you ask for a 2-hour presentation, the session's not that long, but I'm willing to cover whatever if you give me time, because I haven't finished the deck yet, and maybe David is willing to throw that same sort of offer out there for a little agenda guidance.
Yeah, echo the same thing, because it's, you know, deployment in vSphere, like especially when you're doing like zones and regions and stuff like that, can be quite complex. So if there's anyone that has specific things that they are interested in having being covered, you know, I'd be, you know, definitely willing to maybe tailor or put in sections of, or maybe even use that particular thing as an example. So yeah, most definitely reach out.
Okay, there you have it. The other thing that we can't talk about, but originally for the physical event, we were going to have a social event, kind of a meet and greet, birds of a feather, that was sponsored by a local member in Amsterdam. And we've been kicking around the idea of perhaps having an unofficial Zoom, the original one was called vBeer, so maybe we call it a virtual cocktail party or something. And if people are interested in that, we could try to do it. There's no time set aside now, but we've been throwing around that idea. So any feedback on whether, I think we won't do it unless at least a few people tell us they join if it happened. But if we hear that, we'll probably do such a thing. So why don't you just indicate whether you're in favor or against that in the user group Slack channel, and we've got until mid-August to decide on that. So moving along, there was quite a bit of discussion recently in the Slack channel for this user group on compatibility matrix of running Kubernetes on vSphere. And I think it was brought up by a user who was specifically trying to use Red Hat OpenShift. And of course, this group, even though I work for VMware, we're meant to cover all forms of Kubernetes, whether somebody wants to run pure upstream Kubernetes, a commercial distribution by VMware, or a commercial distribution by any other vendor. It's fair scope for this user group to cover the aspects of it. So a lot of this is a repeat of what got into that Slack channel thread, but since Slack can be kind of rough for finding and searching for old issues in traffic, I thought I'd repeat some of this material here, and maybe add a little bit of color, opinion, so others are welcome to chime in on me if they're familiar with some of this subject area, and maybe I missed some resources too. So please just jump in and give your own thoughts and additions. You can either edit this the agenda and notes document directly or come in here verbally, but I'll just run this by. So my perspective on this is that this recent blog, it was published in early May by Cormac Hogan, a member of the group who I don't think is on the call today, is a very good overview of some of the issues. This isn't a simple thing that you can say, oh yeah, if you're running Kubernetes on vSphere, do exactly this, because what you have to do can vary a little bit. Should you be on vSphere 6.7, for example, it might be different than being on vSphere 7. And if you're on something older than 6.7 U3, it really can be quite a bit different, because that was kind of early days when support was just building up. Some of these things have announcements made that they're end of life. In general, most of the things that are supported still can be done today, so that if you find some 2-year-old blog post, it probably still works. But going forward, there's going to be a point where that probably won't work. And the Kubernetes project itself has officially announced an end-of-life program for both in-tree storage plugins. These were storage plugins that were built right into Kubernetes itself. They still are to some extent, but new features have not been added to those in-tree plugins for quite some time. And I'm kind of dubious even about how well the test matrix is actually being conducted on those. So you're kind of on shaky ground if you're still on those today, although I think that they probably still work. But you've been given a warning that you should be making plans to move on to the out-of-tree forms of both the storage plugin, and that out-of-tree form is the CSI, and the out-of-tree cloud provider. Certainly, if I were in the position of coming up with a newly deployed Kubernetes, I'd be looking at the out-of-tree. But the other factor that enters into this is that if you're on a commercial distribution, I believe almost all of these get opinionated about what your choice of storage plugin and cloud provider are, because I understand the perspective of a vendor is that they're going to train their support people, and they don't want to train people in 5 different permutations. Part of their reasoning for selling a commercial distribution is to make it easier for you and make it easier to get support. But that job is perhaps easier if they don't, if they make some choices for you. And I think pretty much all the commercial distributions do. So that said, if you go to a generic document covering the storage provider, the CSI, or the cloud provider, the vendor's documentation, should you be running a commercial distribution trumps whatever might be in that generic doc, because they might have made some choices for you configuration wise or other. And at least in some cases, the vSphere 7, Kubernetes on vSphere 7, I believe actually has some small enhancements. So reading documentation for a commercial distribution and assuming it applies to a different one is perhaps treacherous. So just throwing that out there. So scrolling down, the vSphere storage on CSI documentation official is here at this link. And once again, this is made to be the generic. So you will potentially find CSI documentation embedded in VMware's commercial Kubernetes distributions, but we didn't want to restrict publication of that doc to only our commercial distribution. So that documentation on CSI exists independent of any product offering, and what's here should be usable to anyone electing to use that CSI driver regardless of your Kubernetes. For example, if you're using pure upstream open source checked out of GitHub, that this documentation, the intent is this documentation should work for you, and this is published off of GitHub. So any problems, requests for more, you're free to put questions into the Slack channel on this user group. But you know, if you want to fix the documentation, that would be covered, you know, through the standard GitHub process, which would start with opening an issue. If you're running on vSphere prior to 6.7 U3, once again, this is going back a ways. This is where you really should think about moving to something else, but I understand that there are users who might be stuck in that box. I mean, I run a home lab, and one thing that can get you there is, yeah, I wouldn't use these really old ones for production, but often people have a home lab scenario, or they maybe work for a commercial employer and they're just trying to learn this stuff, and you know, they're not free to use the production system, so they're stuck on really old hardware or really old vSphere because it's what's available. So if you are there, you can get it to work. And I've got a link there to some resource that might explain what's going on there. Another option you have if you're on really ancient tech is, of course, just act like you're on bare metal. I mean, you can deploy VMs on vSphere running your favorite flavor of Linux, and it is perfectly viable to simply follow the Kubernetes project instructions for deploying to bare metal. I've done it myself and it does work. Once again, you might find life easier to live in if you moved up a little bit, but if you're on 5-year-old technology and stuck there, that might be your, you know, that might be your only solution or your best solution. Then that earlier link on GitHub was to the CSI storage, but here's another one for the cloud provider. The same story applies, that the cloud provider advisory for production use has now moved to using the out-of-tree cloud provider, unless you have a commercial distribution that has elected at this current point in time to stick with the in-tree. And if you're on ancient technology, maybe you're stuck with the in-tree just because you're not on a new enough release of things. Moving on here in the agenda doc, I talked about being on specific commercial distributions. So there's a link here. If you're on vSphere 7 and you're using the Kubernetes bundled into that, you should go to this specific doc for that if you're in that specific position. And then Red Hat OpenShift, some people from Red Hat were kind enough to participate in the writing blogs, and I think some of them are active in the Slack community, but there's a blog post on running, I'm not sure what OCP4 is myself, but with the CSI driver. There's a blog post, I think it was written by Robbie Jerome of VMware with a Red Hat person, if I'm not mistaken, of OpenShift 4.3 with CSI. There's some more recent things on OpenShift 4. And this YouTube video I just discovered yesterday, started watching it, but only managed to get it about halfway through. But it looked like a very good resource on running OpenShift 4.4 with vSphere 6.7 U3. If any members are out there with other recommendations, please you mention them now or cut and paste them into the agenda doc to just help other people to come in the future. I did look around just because I want to be fair here and cover everything out there. I did a Google search to see if I could find anything for the D2IQ distribution, but the first page of my Google results didn't show me a doc, but I suspect there might be one out there. Like I say, anybody out there who's got something to add, if you're a member, you have edit rights to this doc, so please add it on there. Or if you discover it 2 weeks from now, just throw it in the Slack channel. So with that said, does anybody who's on this call have any other recommendations or comments they want to make about to help users, any great resources you've found for using Kubernetes on vSphere you want to throw out there?
Yeah, this is Robert Hammond. I'm one of the product managers who's looking after data protection at VMware. So I own all the libraries that people use to back up VMs today, and we're trying to port that stuff into Valero. And we're now talking to the large ISVs that do backup, and we're not, I don't want to say formalizing, but we're coalescing around Valero being kind of the de facto way to back up and restore both the CRDs and persistent volumes. And we're looking for feedback from users in the community around these plans, and also to understand what do they expect the backup experience to be like. So if there's anyone out there that would like to weigh in on this, the door is wide open for feedback.
Do you mind if I jump in and give or you can, just a quick explanation of what Valero is? Because I'm afraid some of these people on this call, or we have an audience that goes and watches the recording on YouTube later. I've had users who are really just starting to kick the tires of Kubernetes and some of these open source projects that are, you assume everybody in the CNCF community has heard of these for years, but they're newbies and they don't. So do you want to do it, or should I?
I'll give it a shot. So
okay.
For anyone that hasn't seen it, Valero is an open source project. It came from HepTO. It used to be called ARC, and Valero is a tool that is used to make backup copies of namespaces or clusters or Kubernetes objects or things that are marked with labels. And it has two purposes. The first, for whatever grouping of Kubernetes objects you want, it will grab a copy of the CRDs that are there and will back them up in a tarball to object storage. The second, if your Kubernetes application happens to leverage a persistent volume, Valero will use a CSI driver to take a snapshot of that volume, whether it's on Amazon EBS or a more traditional storage platform, and it's on a set of LUNs that's out there.
So can I jump in? So just to make it clear, it's open source and it is under the CNCF Foundation at this point, right? And so it's managed by the CNCF as a community effort, just like Kubernetes is. And it backs up both the Kubernetes, your Kubernetes itself, including aspects that you may have customized. And as a secondary function, it'll back up your stateful applications. So if you're running stateful apps under Kubernetes that map to persistent volumes, it's prepared to do that. I think it's either a feature or roadmap to quiesce those apps as kind of a future going forward. It'll kind of increase the quality or the user experience of ever doing a restore once that takes place. It's pretty open-ended on expanding to any form of object store like S3, or there are some vendors that make traditional hardware appliances that hold backups, for example, in an on-prem scenario that are getting involved in the Valero project. So you reached out there for users. I see Bryson is on the call, and I think he might have some thoughts on this if you want to respond, Bryson.
Hey, Rob, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Were you on the call with Walmart where we were talking about that?
Yeah, I was there. We were hoping to go a little bit further down. I think we talked to the team that runs your Tivoli environment.
Okay. So we can have more discussions on that, but yeah, I mean, I definitely am very interested in that working with the persistent volumes.
Yeah, us too. Should I just follow up offline?
Just ping me on Slack.
Okay.
In the Kubernetes Slack.
Okay.
And then
yeah, and if either of you have anything non-proprietary you might want to just throw out there to help others in the community, go for it now. But I understand that some of these might be, more pertain to your exact situation.
I just don't have anything on my head right now. I wasn't
Yeah, you were prepping for this. I'll throw out one aspect of this is that Valero is set up to use the snapshotting of volumes, but that's relatively new tech. So at this point in time, I think that the snapshots for the vSphere CSI are not shipping in production. David, you can, maybe you were working on it before. I know you're not now, but I know that you're at least one resource on the call familiar with storage until Miles arrives.
No, the plugin for vSphere is available now. It's an open source thing. Just search for the vSphere plug or the Valero plugin for vSphere. I think that's what it is. And it's on the Tanzu GitHub page. And we're also gonna, work with everybody else so that if you're, wanting to use a pure array or, have like an EBS volume, we'll support that too.
Okay, great. Anybody else have any thoughts on, or even questions? I mean, if we've been talking over your head and you didn't understand some of this terminology, please go and throw that comment out there and we'll try to help out and explain things.
I'd like to add kind of one thing in that we have a very robust ecosystem of ways to protect your virtual machines today, and our goal is to take everything that we have now that 300,000 plus VMware customers use and bring it to Kubernetes as well. So we don't want to reinvent any wheels. We just want to take proven technology and continue to make it available on this next platform.
Yeah, for those new to Kubernetes, that is kind of a key aspect of making it practical to run stateful apps on Kubernetes. I think stateful apps have been out there for several years now with persistent volume mounts, but that's, yes, you can run it, but in production, you kind of want to have reliable backups available as well to make it a comparable experience to what you used to have in commercial environments on bare metal or running on hypervisors. Okay, it sounds like there's no further comment on that. And I think we've covered all the items in the agenda. Does anybody else want to bring up anything new? Or I'd also like to reach out, even if you just have questions that you want me to go find speakers to talk about, throw it out there to give me some time to get it ready for next month's meeting. Okay, last call. If I don't hear any questions, comments, or agenda item adds, I'm going to close this meeting early, and you can use the time for something else. Okay, gone. Thanks for joining the meeting. I think our attendance is a little lighter than normal, but perhaps because of events going on in the world. And so if this is the first time here, maybe it's been a little more active in the past. Please come back next month. Thanks for attending.
Hey, thanks for setting this up. I really appreciate it.
Sure.